Hello, my name is Kevin V. Symmons. I am a published author. My publisher just recently came out and released my latest novel called Eye of the Storm. My publisher is a small New York publisher, award-winning publisher, and I've been writing for approximately 16 years. I took up writing after I left my business career, which is another story. When I left my business career, I had absolutely no particular not interest. That I always enjoyed writing, but it wasn't what I intended to do. What I intended to do actually was do some traveling with my wife in some quasi-athletic things. I wanted to run a marathon. I'd always been a runner. I wanted to break 80 at golf, which I knew I probably would never do. And I wanted to ski the West and the Alps. Unfortunately, just 10 days after I left my business career, I was unloading a sandbag and I actually broke a disc in my back, shattered a disc, and my athletic ambitions were put on hold. Again, it's wonderful if we come up with all sorts of little formulas, but I know when I speak to people, and this goes back not just to myself, but to my other writing friends, what we practiced as we were going along, as I made friends and went to conferences and got into critique groups and discussed my writing. All of us, and I say all of us, there is a certain small group of people, clique, that I still see and communicate with and get together with all the time. What we've talked about is tenacity and perseverance. One of hardly a hero of mine, but Calvin Coolidge once had a famous quote. He said, "The most important thing in life is not beauty, it's not intelligence, it's not necessarily education or experience. The most important thing for success in life is perseverance." And that's certainly something myself and my fellow writers found. It took me 6 years when I decided I was not going to self-publish, that I was going to really try and seek out a mainstream publisher to take care of my work and to publish my work. So my writing partner, who I still see on a regular basis with and encourages me, we decided there were 7 of us in a critique group, and out of that critique group, I'm very, very proud to say that 6 out of the 7 people received traditional publishing contracts. And that was the result of perseverance, constant submissions, never take no for an answer, rework, things like that. Probably throughout my entire life, I've actually been an avid reader, and I've always enjoyed both romance and thrillers. Mary Higgins Clark, who I had the pleasure of meeting and working with actually at an event several years ago before she passed, was one of the people that I read a lot. But I also read a lot of Ludlum. I read the original James Bond series, but I also was not against reading things like Grisham and Nicholas Sparks, though I hid those away so my friends wouldn't see them. So I think, yes, I always have had a romantic side, but in my writing, what I've tried to do is try to synthesize or amalgamate the romance with the thriller or suspense side of it. I would love to say that my first novel was a breakout success. That's really not true. My first novel titled Rite of Passage, which actually was about, it's a paranormal romantic suspense story, was bought by my publisher back in 2010. I had to rework it a lot, but by the time it was done, actually my publisher and my editor thought it was a decent story, and they were kind enough to nominate it for something called one of the Rom-Con Readers' Crown Awards. Rom-Con is the largest romance writing convention in the world, and they have various categories and subcategories. Rite of Passage was one of the 10 finalists, actually ended up one of the 5 semifinalists for the Rom-Con Readers' Crown Award in the paranormal suspense category. And it later on went on to become, because of its success, reviews, and sales, it went on to become an Amazon Encore Select choice, which was a fairly, just a fairly good thing. But let's be honest, Amazon has the marketing power. It did sell more after that. And at one time it was number one on Amazon. Has been number one a couple of times. And I would love to say it's because of my elegant writing and my, but I would have to say Amazon and my publisher had a lot to do with that in terms of marketing it. People often ask if I have taken anything from my own life in my writing. Um, I suppose in a way I might say I'd love to do that. In another way, I'd say I'd be terrified because there's some pretty evil characters and some pretty difficult situations that occur in my novels. Yes and no. I think every author you talk to, and I've heard millions of them. I've had the pleasure of seeing and meeting Lee Child and Harlan Coben and John Grisham and a variety of romance writers. All of them say there is some small grain of individuality in their characters, but my characters are an amalgam of a lot of things. So I can't say yes. Some of my experiences, I mentioned my musical background. My third novel, Solo, which I absolutely love, maybe my favorite novel, is all about the evolution of a rising operatic soprano, which I wasn't, by the way. But I did experience a lot of the thrill, the anxiety, the adrenaline rush of going on stage that Jessica, my hero, experiences. As I mentioned, some of the things regarding the military. Not that I was ever in combat, but I do have a bit of a military background. Oftentimes you'll see, for instance, my latest novel, Eye of the Storm, gets intimately involved with a life raft situation rescue, which starts it off, and there are several maritime scenes in there. And as I said, I have been literally around boats my whole life. I have a picture in my dresser upstairs of my dad with me on his knee when I was 3 years old at a local yacht club. So, and we've had boats ever since then. My kids are all very well, know how to handle boats. So a lot of the maritime things that I talk about, both the actions and the behavior of ships and boats and even the life raft, things like that I've gleaned, have to do with my personal experience. But I certainly would never build my ego enough by saying that I was a hero in my books. No. My second novel, Out of the Storm, is interesting. We're seasonal residents on the Cape, and back after I had had some success and was, my publisher wanted me to write a second novel after Rite of Passage. I happened to be glancing through the Cape Cod Times one day, the main newspaper down here, and I saw something that caught my attention, which is not unusual for writers who come across different things that they'll take and expand upon. I know my writing partner, Arlene, does that oftentimes as well. But I saw a story, and to me, it really tugged at my heartstrings. It was about a young man who had been a Green Beret team leader who had come back after 3 tours in the Middle East, only to have his beautiful young bride and unborn child die in a terrible car accident. And I thought to myself, that is awful. And what I do is, with all my novels, I take a grain of information or something I've seen or an idea, and I build upon that. And what I did with Out of the Storm was I took that germ of an idea, the tragedy involved with that, and I tried to think how I could twist that into a really deep story. And the way I decided to do it was, in the very beginning of the story, we meet the hero who has lost his wife and his unborn child, and he's getting inebriated, as he does oftentimes, because he's morose, he's depressed, he's terribly sad at what's happened. He hears a knock on the door. He goes out and he opens the door and he sees someone, a young woman, a child, and believe it or not, a Cocker Spaniel. And he hasn't seen this young woman in 10 years. He tries to search his memory and remember who she is. And that's the beginning of Out of the Storm. I thought it was a great hook. And from there on, it builds. And we learn all the things we want to about Ashley Jean, who is the heroine, and Eric. And it turns out, I think we crafted it into a fairly fairly substantial romantic thriller. And the other thing about it was I also wanted to incorporate something that I feel, which is actually part of all my novels. The idea that, God forbid, after 9/11 and terrorism and all the things we see in the world of today, we can't sit back, even if we're not war heroes or we're not policemen, we can't sit back and let the world pass us by and bury our heads in the sand. And we find out that what's gone on in the background of that story is the young woman is actually being pursued by a very, very evil man. And I don't know if I should say I'm proud or strangely, clairvoyant. I wrote this story a year and a half before the Boston Marathon bombings, and the main plot, in the sense of the terrorism, is exactly what those people, I use that word, decided they wanted to do, and that's to inflict terror in a fine American institution like the Marathon. In my case, it was going to be 10 small cities across the United States on the 4th of July. And I used that, and I built that into a terrorist situation.
So
when the Boston Marathon tragedy occurred, I was blown away, if you will. I'm sorry, that's terrible. It's bad. It was not a bad pun there. It was tragic. And I said to myself, oh my God, these, I'm sorry, scumbags, if I can say that, they are doing exactly what I had intended the fellow called the director to do in my novel, Out of the Storm. And the interesting thing about it, just to go back for a brief moment, is when I had sort of workshopped this idea with my writing group, that I said, I think if I wanted to really terrorize America, this is, by the way, of course, obviously long after 9/11, I said, I wouldn't do it by blowing up an airplane. I wouldn't do it by blowing up a shopping mall. What I would do is I would take the most American small town institution I can think of, and 4th of July celebrations at a gazebo in a small town like I grew up in came to mind perfectly. I said I would place explosives in that gazebo and I would blow it up, and I would do it not one place. In my novel, I actually use the number 13 because that was, strange as it sounds, this perverted, twisted man who's the terrorist actually thinks that was the number of the 13 colonies. And, so he used this 13 colonies and was going to blow up 4th of July celebrations. And when I saw the thing at the Boston Marathon, I said, oh my God, my wife even said it. She said, you know what? Because the novel had just come out. She said, oh my God, this is exactly what you were talking about. After Out of the Storm, again, which was, I will say was, again, as Rite of the Passage was, actually was marketed very well as an encore novel and a highlighted selection by Amazon. It achieved #1, and I wanted to go on to something different. And I had been, so for my third novel, I took something, if you will, out of my briefcase, and I'm being facetious when I say that, but most authors always work on many, at least I do anyway, and I know a lot of others do, work on several projects at once. I know as a reader, I always read 3 or 4 books at the same time, and I always work on 3 or 4 projects at the same time. And I had come out, because of my musical background, I had always loved musical theater. I never achieved any success myself, but it was something I loved, and I, sang in choirs, and I, hobnobbed with a lot of people I knew who were musicians. And so I had come up with an idea about a young woman, and the word that came to me was choice, existential things. And one of my favorite, I won't say cliche, but sayings is something, to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, when the gods want to punish us, they let our dreams come true. Now, that isn't exactly what Oscar said, but it's pretty close. In other words, be careful what you wish for. I love that. And I saw it repeated somewhere right after I'd finished Out of the Storm. And I said, you know something? I'm going to take and expand on voices, which was the title of the novel at that particular point in time. And I'm going to make Jessica, my heroine, come to a very, very difficult decision. She has to choose between family, love, and the ultimate success of becoming a mezzo-soprano at the Met or in La Scala, or taking the quick buck, if you will, excuse the cliche, and going off and having instant success somewhere on a much more commercial basis. So that's what I did. And the interesting thing about it is when I sent my manuscript in, the marketing director, my publisher, called me and said, you know, Kevin, we like the book a lot. Certainly going to publish it. But the problem is the title. And I said, Voices. And by the way, I have to credit my wife. She had come up with a title. And because it not only involves a musician, but involves an author, and we authors know all about voices in our heads and voices of our characters. She said, you know what would be a wonderful title? One word title would grab people. Voices. I said, that is awesome. The problem is, probably all of us in the world of today who are connected to the computer know search engine optimization, SEO. And Lisa, the marketing director, said, Kevin, there are 6,400 novels with voices as the first word. So I'm sorry, you're going to have to come up with a different one. So we went back, my wife and Lisa and I, we kind of kicked it around for a week, and we came up with what may even be a better one, the title Solo. Because my heroine is, while a wonderful talent who wants to share her talent with the world, it's all about her. And her whole life has been built around her. And she sort of, puts her head down, charges straight ahead, grabs for success no matter what the cost. And I think maybe we'll find out in the long run it may cost her. People often comment, your heroines are almost as heroic as your heroes. And I kind of like that because, yes, absolutely. I am a strong advocate of the fact that I have enjoyed over the last dozen years, and probably in the time that I've been writing, seeing the emergence or reemergence, as it was probably back in the mid-1800s, of the female heroine or hero, if you will, the Elizabeth Bennets, that kind of thing, where they're a strong-willed women who take the world by the scruff of the neck and say, you know something, you're not going to defeat me. And I also feel that I'd like to think that society and humanity, certainly in American society, has made a bit of a transition, though maybe a lot of it is superficial, in that we value women in a way that, God knows, when I was growing up in the 60s, we did value them, but they were, still, I watched, I kind of cute, and she, is an equestrian, and she wears pigtails, but she's always kind of, been put down by a beautiful older sister and competition with other girls that are sort of more upscale. And the name Paige I identified with because my first college sweetheart was named Paige. So I liked using that name. And very, very similar to Paige in my real life. But anyway, so I went on and I developed a story in which Paige would be my ugly duckling. And again, I'm sorry I keep using that expression, probably that's tacky, but would be my downtrodden girl. She'd suffered a serious riding accident. Her older sister, though her sister was very supportive, was always glamorous and one step ahead of her. She was president of the class and the cheerleader, and Paige was sort of like the nerdy girl who wore the glasses and had braces and pigtails and all that kind of thing. And I wanted to show the evolution that would take place. And the way I did it, to a great extent, was I wanted her to have a hero. And the hero in my story is a young man who Paige had met very, very early on, when she was only 11 or 12 years old, who had come to their estate, Mattapoisett, which for those who aren't familiar with it, is right on Buzzards Bay, a beautiful place on Cape Cod, that area, which I'm very familiar with. And she had fallen in love with him. She had even cut out his picture when he became an all Scholastic, and when he went to Harvard and became an all Ivy football hero, and so on and so forth. And what happens is, the beginning of the story, he is going to, Morgan, my hero, and Paige are going to have a reunion, though Paige doesn't think of it that way. Morgan's family is coming down. They haven't been down for a long time to visit her father and her mother. They're coming down after an absence of probably a half dozen years, and Paige is terrified because she knows what's going to happen. Morgan is going to come down. He's going to look at her sister, who is absolutely drop dead gorgeous and precocious and brilliant and has all sorts of upside, and she's going to be heartbroken because as long as Morgan, she was able to keep Morgan sort of like Holden, put him on a pedestal, it was okay. That could be the boy she could never quite attain, or the love she could never quite attain, but the one she could sort of look at like a shining star. Now it's going to all come down and crash around and what happens is it doesn't. And Morgan actually, without spoiling the story, Morgan actually discovers, the quote is, he said, "I've spent my whole life surrounded by prom queens and cheerleaders. I want to meet someone with substance." And Paige has substance. Eye of the Storm is the sequel, and I'd never done, by the way, I'd never done a sequel. And a lot of my friends had, and I found it interesting. It's difficult to write a sequel because you have to make the assumption that a great many people who are going to read your second or third novel have not read your first. And so you have to keep sprinkling in all sorts of details about the hero and the heroine from the previous novel and some of the characters and the settings and all that. And this one, by the way, is set on Cape Cod, as Eye of the Storm is set on Cape Cod, as was Out of the Storm. It is set 4 years later. I'm sorry, 3 years later than Out of the Storm. I'm confusing them. But as far as what may happen to it, I don't know. Out of the Storm was really no ego. It was a big hit on Cape Cod. I actually had several people who had read it. I was going all over Cape Cod doing talks about it at libraries and bookstores. And this one, the initial reaction to it that only came out maybe a week or two ago, the initial reaction has been pretty good. And that, I'm not saying that on an egotistical basis. I guess, believe it or not, maybe I'm not like all writers. I think all writers kind of feel when we write a story, no, really, nobody's going to really care about this one. Maybe they like the other one. And I know that may sound foolish because, in all honesty, I've had a decent amount of success, a modest amount of success, not the kind of success that Lee Child and Harlan Coben and John Grisham have had, but a decent amount of success. So I always kind of hope that my novels, at least on a local basis, will have some success. And I'm already kind of pleased. It's got a couple of good professional reviews, and several people who have read it, who are not immediate family and friends, have reviewed it already and said that they really were excited about it. And one person even said that they thought it was the best thing I'd ever done. Well, again, I know, please believe me, that's not braggadocio. So I think maybe it has some legs, yes. I think all my novels definitely have the, good versus evil. I guess most people's novels, suspense, romance, or whatever, in there, there's always a good guy and a bad guy, or a good girl and a bad girl. But I think the most common thing that I have tried to develop in my novel is the idea, which goes back to perhaps both my first two novels, is the Rite of Passage and Out of the Storm, is that as individuals, even though we may not be war heroes, we may not, as I said earlier, may not be policemen, we may not be firemen, what we have to do is we have to try and do whatever we can to defeat evil in our own way. And that doesn't mean going out with a gun. People often comment, your heroines are almost as heroic as your heroes. And I kind of like that because, yes, absolutely. I am a strong advocate of the fact that I have enjoyed over the last dozen years, and probably in the time that I've been writing, seeing the emergence or reemergence, as it was probably back in the mid-1800s, of the female heroine or hero, if you will, the Elizabeth Bennets, that kind of thing, where they're a strong-willed women who take the world by the scruff of the neck and say, you know something, you're not going to defeat me. And I also feel that I'd like to think that society in humanity, certainly in American society, has made a bit of a transition, though maybe a lot of it is superficial, in that we value women in a way that, God knows, when I was growing up in the 60s, we did value them, but they were, still, I always watch Andy Griffith and Donna Reed shows on TV Land and say, oh my God, did people really treat their wives that way? So yes, I think women are very heroic characters. And the other thing I like to show in my women in the stories oftentimes are that, going back to the Paige and Chrysalis, story, if you will, that they can emerge from, if you will, from a shy role and take control of the story. And that's what happened with Chrysalis. Once again, I want to thank you all so much for your patience. I hope we learned something together today, and I hope you enjoyed having me. My name as an author is Kevin V, as in Victor, Symmons, Symmons. You'll find me on my website, www.ksimmons.com. The website we're updating all the time has a lot of tidbits, interesting things, frequently asked questions about writing, a lot of photos on it, events, upcoming information. But I want to thank you all so much for your patience. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we get to meet in person sometime.
What do you think, Jules?